Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the YouTube channel. Martino Puccio, Matt Santangelo, and alongside us today is a very special guest and friend of mine, former coworker at 1:37 p.m. and Proper Football, Matt Reed. Reed, thank you so much for joining us, man. I'm gonna try and navigate the two Matts here. Might just have to delegate Santangelo to
It's all good.
Santangelo today,
Yeah.
but it's just easier. But first of all, Matt Reed, how are you? And then Santangelo, how are you?
Good, man. How about yourself? I'm glad to see you guys. It's been a little while, but appreciate you having me on.
I could be doing better with the way this market's shaping up so far, but I'm hanging in there. I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, so Matt Reed does a lot of stuff for 1:37 p.m. We obviously used to cover a lot of the younger players in world football, obviously U.S. men's national team, since we're both American, based out of New York. And he's obviously a huge Chelsea fan as well, if you watch any of his content, which I highly suggest you do. So Milan, the American side of things, and the Chelsea side of things are all intertwined over this past, week and a half or so. So Matt Reed, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, we'll get to him first because that one is pretty much done according to all sources. It's going to be around 20 million euro for a fee. I believe he just had 1 year left on his contract. So Chelsea have done a phenomenal job this window so far of selling players, as we've seen with some of those Saudi teams. But what do you think of this deal for Chelsea, of what you guys are getting back fee-wise, and how do you think he fits in with Milan?
I mean, I think across the board it works out well with both sides. Like Ruben's a player that has never really fit in the way that he was kind of hyped up to be coming out of the academy. You look at the other guys that have come through Chelsea's system and made big impacts, whether it was Reece James, Mason Mount to some degree, kind of those guys that came through at the same time. Ruben's always had the talent. And I think one of the really great things about him, and probably something that will be really beneficial for you guys, is his versatility. I mean, if you watch Chelsea play last season, like obviously this was not a prime Chelsea team by any stretch. It was miserable to watch for most of the season. But the one thing that you can say about Rube is that he can play multiple positions and he can play them pretty adequately. By trade, he's obviously mostly a center mid. He typically plays as more of a number 8. He's not necessarily the best defensively, but even when he was stuck at right back at times last season, he did really well. He's really good at getting forward, which is something that could definitely help you guys on the right side of the pitch, because I know you've been lacking a right wing for some time now. But I think just in terms of what he can provide for you in multiple positions, the price tag kind of you're really getting a player that could serve as like multiple players, because you can kind of plug and play him in different spots. So I think for you all, that's probably a good start to the window. And obviously, it won't be the last midfielder that you sign. So replacing Tonali is going to be a huge priority. And I'm sure that they'll get some more moves done.
So Matt, so I want to ask you, because I think obviously everyone talks about Milan's injury woes and how they're always
Right.
having players on the shelf. Ismail Benacer is the best midfielder we have on the roster.
Sure.
He's out until February of 2024. And they also highlighted this with Ruben Loftus-Cheek. So my first question to you is, how much of a concern should that be from him going to the Premier League to obviously making the transition over to Serie A? Is that something that you think that, could rectify itself? Do you think he could be a player that can feature in over 2,000 minutes? Because I looked at some of his stats and the minutes he's logged over the past 3-4 years. And he hasn't been able to get over that 2,000 threshold, which, again,
Right.
context matters, right? There's a lot more competition in that midfield versus what maybe you have at Milan, where it's a revolving door, players are consistently being rotated in. So can you speak on that a little bit and what Milan fans could expect from his availability?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, again, this is if it's not the best situation, it's probably as good as possible for Ruben at this point, when you consider the fact that he was coming from a Chelsea side where minutes were always going to be limited just because of who was playing in the midfield. Outside of last season, obviously, where Conte went down, Jorginho was sold halfway through the season. Like, those were two mainstays of our midfield for the better part of 5+ years. So getting past those two guys in the starting 11 was basically impossible, no matter how good you were. And then obviously you had Mason Mount playing a little bit further forward. So I think in terms of coming to Milan, it's a great situation for him. He has had some injuries in the past, but he went through last season for the most part relatively injury free. So I think this is a great situation for him coming into a side that desperately needs midfielders at this point. They just need bodies more than anything else. But I think he's also competent enough of a player that he's going to be not just out there to use him as a body, that he's actually going to be able to contribute both offensively and defensively.
So real quick, I think Martino is probably going to get to this, but I just want to get it off my chest here. So my second question to you is, so Milan are currently playing, for the most part, it's probably going to be a 4-2-3-1, assuming we get a vastly different personnel in the midfield, which obviously it's looking like that's going to be the case. You mentioned that he maybe isn't the best from a defensive standpoint, although you said he is pretty versatile and he can cover in multiple areas and he's adequate at best at most things. Do you see that as a concern? Do you think, that 4-2-3-1 will be a problem for him? Do you think he can adapt to that? What do you think there?
I think as long as he's playing next to somebody that's more of a traditional 6, that it'll probably be fine. Again, not knowing fully what you guys are going to do the rest of the window, it's kind of hard to judge that, especially with Benacer out. But yeah, I mean, RLC is basically a traditional box-to-box midfielder. Like, he's a great two-way player. He's not great in terms of filling that 6 role the way that Conte did at Chelsea or any top CDM you can think of does. But yeah, as long as he's playing next to somebody that's good enough traditionally on the more defensive side of things, I think you guys will be fine.
Yeah, I think that's the really interesting thing trying to gauge with Milan this summer so far is the players that they've been linked to don't necessarily fit the formation. And it's one of the players we're going to talk about in a second, but just real quick with that, just a Milan point, they don't have a defensive midfielder on this team. They're zero. And especially as of today, if they were to start in a Champions League, it's going to be Rade, Krunic, Pobega, and whoever else you want to fit in there as well. I know someone's escaping my thoughts right now, but that's the point, is that they don't have anyone in that double pivot. And if you lean on Ruben to do that, I don't think that's going to be the case, because they have to change that up. We'll see if they get Daichi Kamada in there as well. But another player that is of interest to everybody in here, for multiple reasons, because he is Captain America, and he is at Chelsea for the time being. Obviously, that move was massive from Dortmund a couple of years back. Obviously, it hasn't worked out. There's a lot of different reasons for it. Obviously, mentioning how hard it is to break into that squad. He didn't have a solidified position as well. And then the injury history is well documented by pretty much everybody. So the reported fee that Chelsea was demanding was around 30 million. I think we all know that's not going to happen. I kind of don't see 25 million happening. I think there's going to be somewhere around 20 at this point. I don't see how Milan get anything for 15 million. There's just too much, but regardless if Pulisic is going to be healthy, regardless if he's going to be producing, just him being there alone is a huge draw. We talk about Tonali and that loss of jersey sales at the end of the day. The amount of Pulisic is going to be a top 3 jersey sale if he were to come to Milan next season, strictly because of who he is and the country that he plays for. And then also just there's a large Italian American fan base, 3 of us right here, about it as well. So it'd be crazy to see from that sense, but where does he fit? Because, I've talked to both of you separately about this. He's not a right winger full time, even though he has played a lot of it over the course of his young career. He's not necessarily a 10 either, but he is a good left winger. But with his salary and Rafael Leao existing, he's not going to be starting as the left wing at Milan. What is he going to fit in as a role for this club? Either of you can answer this first. But is it possible to kind of have him as a non-starter, but someone that starts often, in the sense that he isn't married to the number 10 position in the 4-2-3-1 or not married to the right wing position? Like, where does he play that he gets a significant amount of minutes that warrants the wages that Milan would be paying him?
I mean, I would say it has to be right wing. If you go back to his days at Dortmund, he actually did play a fair share on both sides. And like you and I, like you said, we've talked about this offline, but the one thing I will say about Pulisic is that he is very interchangeable as well. Like, I think a lot of the guys that you have been targeting this window so far, and obviously most of them haven't gotten done yet because it's so early, but the great thing about them is that a lot of these guys can kind of play multiple positions. Pulisic is obviously best on the left. There's no question about that, the way that he attacks players. If you watched him in the Mexico game recently, I mean, he was just torching the right backs for Mexico the entire game. So like that is what he's best at. Putting him on the right side, kind of, you do put him at a little bit of a disadvantage just because he's not a natural left-footed player. He's not going to be able to score goals the way that he does cutting in on his right foot. But that being said, he can still get at defenders. He's still going to whip in crosses, play balls across the center of the box and things of that nature. But he did have a lot of experience doing this at Dortmund. And the guy that he was playing with at Dortmund, Ousmane Dembele, I think we can agree has gone on to do pretty well for himself. So Dortmund has a history of producing these types of players. I think that the price tag at this point, if it is over, let's say like 15 million, will be strictly because of the fact that he's American and that he's playing for the U.S. men's national team. I don't think it's more about the fact that he doesn't have the talent, because he's always had the talent. It's just been more the fact that he's been constantly battling injuries. Thankfully, recently, at least towards the end of the season, it seemed like he had kind of gotten that under wraps, and he finally got to see a bit more minutes towards the end of the year. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're getting somebody like him, it's not to come off the bench. And obviously they have a need at right wing. And even if he's not a natural right winger, having the threat of him on one side and Leao on the other is probably pretty exciting.
I would agree with you there, Matt. And that this is something I actually tweeted out a couple days ago. And I usually try to tweet it out late at night because I know the European audience is going to kind of latch on to it, and I want to see what I wake up to. And I thought it was pretty fair. I was like, I've always liked the player. It's never been a matter of the quality not being there or in the final third not being able to do what he needs. I think, we've been around Pulisic as a young player for years, right? I remember watching him as a 17-year-old in the Champions League. He's 24 years old now. We've seen enough of him to know what he can and cannot do, and he can do quite a bit in the attacking third. So from a like almost a Ruben Loftus-Cheek, it's not a matter of the quality. It's not a question of that. It's the availability. And I really, again, question a player coming into a new league. Can he adapt? Because you know how this league could be physically from the defensive side. And if he's going to be playing out of the position as well, how is that going to bode for him? And, I've always considered Pulisic maybe not necessarily being the main character in a team, right? Because he was at Borussia Dortmund. He had Dembele. He had a lot of other young players. So, again, it's not really like the big perennial superstar that he has to kind of jockey for that limelight in that role. But when he went to Chelsea, it's almost as you always have stars around you, you always have top players around you, so it's easy to get lost in the shuffle. I think that maybe by him going to Milan and knowing that Leao is the main character in that attack, he is the focal point of that attack and what we're trying to do going forward, maybe that does favor him a little bit. He could take a little bit more of a step back, not have all that pressure of being like this big 60-70 million transfer from Chelsea, and he can maybe go back to being the player that he was at Borussia Dortmund. But the one thing I do want to look at with him is, again, the fee, right? Because I think, you talked about it, we're talking about it here regarding, do you see him making a move where he's going to be a backup at a new club and he's going to have to fight for minutes? I mean, I'm just looking at the depth chart we have and the fact that we're going after other players in the attack. You have Leao starting. He's in that left wing spot. You still have the Ketelare. I don't know what the future holds for him. There's a good chance he does stay. There's a chance he gets sold for 25 to 27 million. Milan cuts their losses and move on, and they play him as Pulisic as a number 10. And then they're obviously going after players in the wide area. Chukwueze is a top player that they're looking at from Villarreal. That's probably going to cost you 40 million, give or take, plus his wages. So I'm just trying to kind of grasp everything with this move and whether or not it really makes sense to put 20 million on the table for a player that may not start that many games.
Exactly. And then wages, just real quick, one of the rumors that was stated as well by some reliable reporters with Moreto, he was saying that Chukwueze is not ruled out even if Pulisic were to arrive. So that just makes it even more interesting because then
that makes us believe that CDK is probably gone then.
Right.
Who knows with that? Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. They still have to sell Salamakers or Macias as well because then you're like at 4 or 5 guys on the right wing side, and Rebic is already denying a sale to Saudi Arabia, which has gotten me irate. So that's besides the point. But yeah, I think it's going to be really fascinating to see where he would even fit in. And the only other strong link that we've heard of, anyways, outside of Milan with him is over at Borussia Dortmund. But there's just some sense of the way Jerry Cardinal is trying to move things forward. And this is kind of where we're moving to this next topic and final player. Americans inbound for Milan. And one of the main targets now that is kind of heating up is Eunice Musa, who is, in my opinion, one of the more talented midfielders that the U.S. is going to ever field, or especially within the past 10 to 15 years. Valencia, obviously, a relegation side. Really poor season from them. Musah had a very strong World Cup, as we all saw. He was really, I thought he was good enough for Valencia this past season. A lot of people like to highlight the yellow cards. This is what we were talking about before we started recording here. And it was a little unfair because about half of those yellow cards were accumulated within the first 16 matches. There's obviously 38 matches within La Liga. Over the course of the last 22 matches where he was playing often, he didn't pick up that many yellow cards. To me, that shows the amount of maturity moving forward. He isn't traditionally a great defensive midfielder. He's very versatile, similar to Ruben Loftus-Cheek. Matt Reed, I'll let you get into it. You kind of give us what the profile is, because so many Milanisti are really interested in the player that Eunice Musa is. And then Santangelo, let me know if you think that fee for 20 million is justifiable and if he would fit in. So yeah, let's go with the American stuff here first, Matt Reed.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting, assuming this does go through, I think you're getting a player that has so much upside. If you go back to when you look at the battle just to get him into the U.S. men's national team, and how, I mean, England fans are really fickle in terms of, I mean, a lot of respects, but especially in terms of when they lose a player. They said it about Musiala and countless others that they've lost due to dual nationalship in the past. But like, losing Musa was a huge blow for England. And when the U.S. was able to get him and kind of complete that midfield trio that they're going to have for the next, hopefully 5 to 10 years, with Tyler Adams, McKennie, you can throw Gio Reyna into that mix now because he plays the number 10 as well. But Musa is just, he's a great two-way player. He's a really good traditional box-to-box player. And I think the biggest change with him over the past year, and obviously he's still really young, is that he's gotten significantly better defensively. Now, some of that was forced because of how bad Valencia was this season. I mean, he really didn't have much to work with. They just barely survived relegation. But if you look at what he was asked to do during Nations League against Mexico and Canada, you can say what you want about either team, but they're still essentially rivalry games in region. And he stepped up in both those matches and played really, really well in a non-traditional position for him as a number 6, when he typically plays further up pitch. So like, again, similar to Loftus-Cheek, similar to a bunch of the other guys that you guys have been linked to, you're getting a player that's very versatile, again, can play multiple positions. And with Musa especially, I think the exciting thing will be if he can play in his natural number 8 spot and get a little bit more forward, link up with Leao, potentially link up with Pulisic. That chemistry is obviously going to be tremendous between those two guys if you can have 2 Americans in the same team. So I would be really excited. Honestly, out of the 3 players, I think Musa is probably the safest one of the 3 in terms of playing 25, 30 plus games a season in Serie A, and then obviously contributing in Champions League and other competitions as well. But yeah, I would be very excited to see him go to Milan for a number of reasons, just because obviously you guys are a much more sound situation than Valencia. And then on top of it, you have those players around him, that actual supporting cast that you can kind of get the best out of him the way that he does with the U.S. men's national team.
I think, yeah, I would agree there. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and grandstand as this biggest Yunus Musa, fanboy that's watched all of his games, but
sure,
I've seen him on the men's national team level, and much like with Pulisic, it's a player that he stepped up. You could see some maturity almost by force because of the role he's having to play, right? And I think that, getting back to the card conversation, Martino, like the context does matter in a sense of when these cards are being picked up. Is it a tactical foul at the end of the game where he's pulling someone down and getting a cheap yellow just to kind of save a goal? Like, those are the things that you have to kind of look at and take into the conversation. But the more I look at, again, just speaking more so on Milan's market and where it looks like they're kind of heading here, it looks like because they have to fill so many different roles, they're not going to go after and get one marquee 40 million signing. I don't think Fratesi is going to be a player they're going to bring in due to the fact that they have to cover so many different areas. They have to cover probably 2 attackers. They need a striker. You need 2 to 3 midfielders. I think after Ruben Loftus-Cheek, you probably still need 2 starting quality midfielders. Yunus would be one. So, and then we didn't even talk about left back as a backup because it looks like Ballatore is going to be on his way out. We need another defender. So they have so many things to do that I think they're going for more of that like 15 16 to 25 range of a player, where you see it with Ruben Loftus-Cheek, 16 million plus bonuses. Pulisic is probably going to be in that 20 range. And you're seeing Eunice is the tag here. It looks like it's 20 million. Now, I'm not saying that Chukwueze couldn't be on the table, but you kind of get the point, right? I think they're trying to spread that money out, cover multiple different areas, to Matt's point, get players that are versatile, that can maybe fit into a 4-2-3-1, or in-game play in a 4-3-3 with a more traditional midfield three. So I don't necessarily mind that. Again, I think it's just it comes with the territory of targeting young players, and Eunice Musa is going to be a player that, will have his bumps and bruises adapting to the league, just like Pulisic probably would. But I think at the end of the day, there's so much quality there, and there's so much talent in that position that Milan do need that.
Yeah, I really haven't liked a player so much from the midfield position Team USA. I don't consider Gio the same type of midfielder. He's more of like a 10 in my eyes because he's so much closer to goal all the time. But Musa, just he's 20, and to be doing that and seamlessly transition into that role with the national team, he really assimilated very quickly in every single match, because Matt Reed and I had to watch like almost every single U.S. men's national team game, whether interested or not.
Just go back to that England game, especially, and the way the midfield locked down essentially England's golden generation of midfielders right now: Declan Rice, Bellingham, Mason Mount.
Declan just went for like 120 million today,
right?
So 100 million less.
What the U.S. was able to do in that game alone was, I think, enough of a sample size just to watch a player like Musah excel in that type of situation.
So we got to say it. If this just popped in my head now, if there is one more American player to join, I think there still is that possibility. Because even Aronson was looked at before Leeds last season. It's still the same scouting network at Milan. I don't understand how Balogun is not on the radar for this. If there was, besides Musah, who would fit in, I don't understand how Balogun is not like the price is fair. It's justified in the market for strikers these days. He's not going to have a role at Arsenal. I think he's already kind of stated that on the record. And again, someone who just stepped up immediately with the national. He looked insane. The best, like, no joke. It's not an exaggeration. That's the best striker I've ever seen for Team USA. Like, pure talent wise, I can't recall someone better than that. Matt, do you think that? Oh, sorry. See, this is what happens. Matt Reed, do you think it's feasible for Milan, like, to say at the end, like, it's probably going to come down to something like Scamacca with an obligation or a choice. This is what DiMarzio is saying as well. Do you see Balogun potentially going to Serie A? Like, where would he go at that point? I know this is more of a U.S. men's national team question, but like, where would he go at this rate? Because I think this would be a perfect fit over here.
Yeah, I mean, so it is interesting. I could see him getting another loan move within Ligue 1 just because he had so much success. He's really close with Thierry Henry, who's been kind of advising him over the past couple of years. But if he were to move leagues, I think there's two guys from this half of the world that would be great for Milan, and it's Balogun, and then it's obviously Jonathan David as well, I think, who's been linked with the club in the past. I think a lot of it would come down to the price tag, but you're getting two players that are like very similar profiles. I think David's a little bit more versatile in terms of having the ball at his feet, but Balogun's just a natural finisher, and he did it at a Iran side that obviously they outperformed a lot of expectations. Their manager got a lot of press this season because of his background and coming into a situation being so young and kind of getting the most out of his team. And they still finished mid-table in a league that doesn't really get a lot of respect. So maybe they didn't exactly fulfill their expectations when you have a 20-plus goal scorer within your side. But Balogun was on loan. I mean, again, he's not going to, at least at this time, get his chance with Arsenal when they've got Nketiah, they've got Gabriel Jesus, who they spent a ton of money on last year. Maybe Arsenal holds on to him for one more year because I'm not sure that they're fully convinced about Jesus, given his injury last year, given how well they played without him for most of that time, honestly. And I do think they actually have Balogun in pretty high regard. Arteta's spoken pretty high about him in the past. But if this were the time to pounce after the season he had, I think, if you're Milan, you go all in, because what's the biggest missing piece that you have at this point outside of a right wing? And obviously the midfield situation just because of injuries, but it has to be striker. You went after Origi last year. That didn't work out. Giroud's not getting any younger. Zlatan, like, if you can go get a guy that's in his early 20s that just bagged 20 goals last season, you do that. And you link them up again with potentially more American players. That's going to help their cohesion. They already know each other really well. I think Leao on the other side, I mean, that's a dangerous front three.
Santangelo, what do you think potentially with that? And then we'll head on out here.
Yeah, no, I think if we're speaking purely on the profile and what we have known Balogun to be as a striker, I think he would be a fit. I mean, let's be honest here, though, guys. Like, most players most players of good quality, like in the striker role, like we had Giroud for a couple of seasons, Ibrahimovic,
Right.
On the the back end of his career, but we've whiffed on so many strikers up front. We've gone the cheap route. We're bringing back Colombo, who showed some promise at Lecce. He ain't the long-term solution. I'd be stunned if he actually plays minutes for Milan. They signed Loftus-Cheek for $5 million. I think in not last January prior. He's probably going to get loaned out to Serie A. So like they don't have a solution up front. And again, it goes back to what I just said earlier, though. Like if it's going to be 30 to 35, I don't know if they're going to have it in them to spend that money when they have a midfield that they have to revamp. We have the attack. They have a left back, maybe another central defender. I just don't know where the room is for a 30 to 35 million player. I like the player. I just don't know if this is the ownership that's going to be ambitious and, as Paolo Maldini quoted in his interview on CBS, brave enough to spend the money when they need it.
Yeah. Can I ask you guys a question real quick? Just being the resident Milan fans, given the fact that you already surprisingly in a lot of ways sold Tonali, and just in terms of how tight money is in terms of how much they want to spend, would you be surprised if they went out and sold another big name player, whether it's Magnan?
Not this summer. Not this summer. Every other report has indicated they already ejected multiple bids for Magnan, which is kind of nice to see.
Right.
And I think Tonali was, listen, whether we agree with it or not, we've been on the record saying we don't. It was an opportunistic type of deal where no one else was going to be offering a range that's going to go up to 80 million euro for him. That wasn't coming from United. Chelsea was interested. They weren't going to go above 60 from everything we read. Certainly wasn't going to happen across any other league because no one else could afford that or go for a player of his level. I do think next year for sure. I think Leao is probably gone. And I'm interested to see what the fee would be at that point. I don't think anyone will be triggering that 175 million release clause unless Kylian Mbappe's situation is resolved and he goes over to Real Madrid and they want a left wing replacement and it's not just Victor Osimhen, which God knows they could do both, knowing how that club operates. So that wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, I don't think so, Matt. What about you? Personally,
no, I don't think we're going to see another. I think it would be very irresponsible to sell two top players because I think we could talk about the quality and yeah, it's a lot of money, and I think that's what I've seen the conversation be on social media when it comes to Milan fans thinking like, well, we got 80 million, now we could spend the money. I'm like, yeah, but the reason why Milan were able to win a title 2 seasons ago and make the push that they did last year in the Champions League was they had a stability. They had stability within their team of players that you can rely on that can play at that level. You had Tonali, you had Benacer, Tomori, you had guys with Champions League experience that have been cornerstone players of this project for the better part of 3 seasons. You can't expect to revamp and overhaul your team every summer and expect to get results without taking a step back and regressing. And they regressed last year as a team. So I think it would be irresponsible to sell one of those players. But I agree with Martino. I think one of them is definitely gone next summer. And I do want to say this, Martino, though. I know you mentioned it being Leao. I could kind of see it being Magnan because of the contract situation.
I think his age and injury history too. Like, say he misses a few more matches. Yeah, I mean, listen, dude, cash out on a goalkeeper. Like, I'm more than okay with it. He's incredible, top 3 in the world. I think I could see Chelsea swooping back in for that. And again, we don't know what the budget is. The budget was supposed to be 50 million base because of when you make Champions League and all that. But this is the really important part, and I want to leave this, and then Matt Reed, I'll let you plug and everything. The reason for having to be aggressive in this window is very important because of the Benacer injury, putting him out until 2024. The Champions League group stage. As of right now, we don't know what the draw is, but whoever they get, they're not well positioned. They don't have a midfield to advance to the knockout stages. They just don't. and they have to be perfect in how they hit these transfers. We'll see what happens. Is there going to be ability to sign more players with a couple more sales with like a Salamakers, a Messias, and Ante Rebic? We'll see what happens with Origi. I doubt Origi could even get maybe some Prem team comes in and says we'll take him. But that needs to happen. We need to know if that 50 million exists and how much of that Tonali money will be moved. Because as of right now, a lot of people want to look at it like, oh, they're spending some of their Tonali money. It's like, okay, well, calm down. Maybe if we just look at the $50 million budget, 50 million euro budget that was in there, you could just say, okay, they've only put in 21 million of Loftus-Cheek, and then there's some other free agent deals that they could potentially bring in, like a Kamada. We'll see and that also is contingent upon him getting a German passport, because the EU issue with all those passports and all that stuff. But anyways,
Yeah.
that we'll find those answers out throughout the course of the summer. Matt Reed, bro, love talking to you. Really appreciate having you on here. Plugged it at the bottom at Matt Reed Football, but obviously you cover so many different things and you write as well. So just plug all that stuff.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on. Just follow Proper Football. That's where I do most of my work on all of our social platforms. And then I'm Matt Reed Football, FUTBOL on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, etc. Best of luck to you guys the rest of this summer. I'm excited to see what you guys do, because I think some of these players you're linked to, it's obviously tough losing a player like Tonali, but I think some of these replacements, you guys will be in a better position than you think in the next couple months.
Yeah, good luck telling that to the fan base. Santangelo, just go plug your stuff.
Sure. Everything's on Twitter, guys, at Matt_Santangelo. Working on some articles. I know I've been saying that the past couple episodes we've gone here, but life has gotten in the way a little bit. And of course, a little bit of golf. I know Matt's a foot golf guy, so he can attest to that. But everything I'm working on will be shared on Twitter, again, at Matt_Santangelo.
Yeah, foot golf. Oh, Matt Reed's one of the best in the country. Like, legit. You were just at the World Cup. How'd you end up placing again?
We made it to the quarterfinals for team. Unfortunately, I didn't play great in the individual, but it was a lot of fun. It was some amazing courses down in Orlando.
Hey, an American made it to a quarterfinal in a World Cup. That's
shocker.
all that matters. But yes, guys, go follow both Matts and follow myself at Martino Puccio. That's pretty much everywhere. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go over to Rabona TV. I was just on his YouTube channel discussing the Tonali sale and all the other stuff regarding that. We appreciate you guys, and we'll see if more Americans will be joining us. See you next time.